Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at supplier diversity and responsible and sustainable procurement. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the supply chain and waste working groups here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. Joining us from Denmark is Alice Sindberg Hemmingsen of Responsible Procurement Excellence. And from the UK we have Aaron Reid, Sustainable Procurement Lead for Balfour Beatty's UK construction business, and Colin Han of Supplier Diversity Europe. Today's presentations will last for around 40 minutes, which will leave us with 10 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Just type in your question and press send, and then we'll wait till the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Alice, who's going to get us started with today's presentations. So Alice, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for joining everyone. Today's webinar is going to be about supplier diversity and how it forms a part of the responsible and the sustainable procurement approach. And I know that Stephen just introduced the participants, but I think we should just briefly go over today's presenters. There's myself, Alice Hemmingsen from Responsible Procurement Excellence, and yes, I am based in Denmark. I work around the world, and I try to support companies in developing and integrating actionable approaches to responsible procurement. That could be supplier diversity, building up programs, building up tools and processes to ensure that it gets carried out. Then we have Aaron, who is the Sustainable Procurement Lead at the Balfour Beatty, which is a UK construction business. He also chairs the UK Sustainable Procurement Working Group and helps develop efficient, consistent and effective approaches to sustainable procurement across the group. At the end we have Colin Han, who works with Supplier Diversity Europe. It's an entity based in Brussels and London. He also works with business strategy and communications at the Street Consulting, which is based in central London. The agenda of today, we've worked a lot on that, and we're hoping to give you a lot of practical examples on how you can do it. But first of all, we want to introduce you to what is supplier diversity and what are the business benefits. I'll be presenting on that one. Next, we'll have Aaron presenting on supply diversity, the Balfour Beatty way. He'll talk a little bit about their definition of supply diversity, present the business case, why they did it, how they did it, and the highlights from 2013. So you'll have something to look forward for. At the end, we'll have the Supplier Accreditation initiative, which will be presented by Colin Han. He'll also do a little bit of sum up. And at the end, you'll have the possibility to ask your questions and get your answers. Yeah. So let's get started. Supplier diversity to me is when companies really actively work to integrate underutilized businesses into their procurement processes, strategies and decisions. You could also say that supplier diversity is a broad concept describing the inclusion of groups that traditionally have found it difficult to break into the systems that large organizations have set up to buy in goods and services. Diverse suppliers could be local businesses, underrepresented businesses such as ethnic minorities, veterans, women, immigrants, disabled, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. It could also be organizations based in specific economically disadvantaged communities. It could be social enterprises, sheltered workshops employing disabled people. It could also be from prisons. And what we're going to talk, or the example from Balfour Beatty, which we're going to focus on today, are SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. And Balfour Beatty is going to give you a more insight into what their definition of an SME is, which you'll find very useful, I'm sure. So at the end of the day, what is supplier diversity and why should you at all care? What I'm at least seeing, and others are also seeing is that there is a growing momentum for supplier diversity, especially in Europe. Procurement organizations are now recognizing the business benefits and do see it as a natural part of a sustainable and responsible approach in procurement. It's originally a US concept where it's legally driven, though it has developed its own European identity, I think. So you could ask the question, why is there at all a need for supplier diversity? And I think we have to remember that organizations have been and will continue to be increasingly subject to public scrutiny of their actions, practice, policies, and ethics. So there's a growing pressure from social pressure groups who continue to be extremely influential, especially in affecting reputation. So as CSR moves steadily up the political and public agendas, organizations will be called upon to demonstrate their social credentials in a variety of areas, such as supplier diversity. So if we're looking at what really is happening in Europe when it comes to demographics, we could say that the face of Europe is changing. For example, in relation to age, people are living longer. This also impacts on the numbers of people with disabilities, which are increasing. I guess you know of a couple, at least I do. Society is getting more tolerant, and this is reflected in equality legislation. Gay and lesbian people, for example, can now be more confident and open about who they are and what they want and what they aspire to. So here, procurement plays a key role as they really need to respond to this changing external environment and all times obtain the best strategic fit. So they need to produce products and services that are appropriate to an increasingly diverse marketplace and be able to find the best suppliers from a diverse supplier base. And failure to respond to this in this changing world may lead to strategic drift, loss of competitive advantage, as well as market share. So I think by implementing supplier diversity, the business can stay aligned with the changing marketplace. Now, what can you gain in terms of business benefits? If you're looking at the SME part, I would say that it does form a substantial proportion of the European businesses. And that's why I think in the European context, and what we're going to hear more about today is that there is a strong focus on the SMEs. They employ, in the European part, they employ over 75 million people across Europe and contribute with over 50% of the EU GDP. So it's a vital part of the economy. And policymakers and politicians strongly believe that working with SMEs and diverse suppliers in general can have a spin-off effect in speeding up the integration of the marginalized groups. But coming back to the business benefits, when large organizations make the conscious and active decision to diversify their supply chain, there are pretty much many positive payoffs. Companies that have implemented supply diversity programs say that the payoff has come in the form of stronger relationships with their supply base, new business opportunities, and a more agile supply chain, but also a spread of risk. Yes, and I think we should hand over the microphone to Aaron Reed from Balfour Beatty. Aaron, are you ready to tell us how you've been executing on your supply diversity strategy? Aaron, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay. Aaron, will you tell us a little bit about your the way you have executed on supply diversity?
Yeah, no problem. Delighted. My name is Aaron Reed. I'm the Sustainable Procurement Lead at Balfour Beatty. As Alice said earlier on, I work as part of our UK construction business, but I also support our other UK businesses with implementing a consistent approach to sustainable procurement across our group. Prior to working at Balfour Beatty, I've done some work as on an interim basis for a number of construction-based companies around the sustainable procurement agenda. Prior to that, I've worked in the public sector for the GLA, and for Regional Development Agency Advantage West Midlands running diversity projects. You may or may not have heard of Diversity Works for London or Birmingham Professional Diversity, and so I hope that some of that experience will be useful to us as we go through today, and also in answering your questions towards the end. For today then, I'm really going to tell you a little bit about Balfour Beatty, just to give you some context about kind of who we are and what we are and what we do. Tell you about our approach to supplier diversity and how that fits into our broader approach to sustainability and sustainable procurement. So just a little bit about Balfour Beatty then. If you haven't heard of Balfour Beatty, we are a relatively large company. We have an annual revenue of about £10 billion and about 40,000 employees in about 80 different countries around the world. We're essentially or predominantly a construction and infrastructure company, but we also have investments, professional and support services businesses as well. We build stuff. Just to give you an idea of or a flavour for what some of those operations are around the world, in terms of our construction businesses in the US, throughout Europe, in the UK, our rail business. I'm not going to linger too long on this slide. It's really just to give you an idea of the scope and the breadth of the type of operations that we have in Balfour Beatty. And again, I won't linger on this slide either. It's obviously our share price is healthy, being a PLC company. I suppose I need to share that information with you. But really the purpose of this slide is just to show you the balance of our operations in terms of the split between what we do in the UK, around 4.6 billion pounds worth of revenue, and in the America and the rest of the world. So again, really just to give you an idea of how that split is. So it's about 46% of our business is done in the UK. And I suppose this slide is really just a reminder to myself and also to you guys that although yes, we are very focused on our shareholder value, that doesn't in any way compromise our corporate values, and our corporate values certainly support us in delivering our approach to supplier diversity. And again, I won't linger. Again, this slide, again, really just I'm trying to give you an idea in terms of Balfour Beatty, and that's Balfour Beatty Group, which operates globally in lots of different sectors. And as I said, I work for the construction part of our business, and the construction part of our business does about 65% of our total revenue. So between what we do in the UK and our construction businesses, you start to see that our construction business in the UK is fairly significant. We've done projects like Olympic Park, the Aquatic Centre, things like that, which you may be aware of. So in terms of the piece of the business that I work for then, and I promise that the statistics are about to get a little bit more interesting, Construction Services UK, we're responsible for about £2.85 billion worth of the total revenue for the group, and of that we had a total spend last year of £1.6 billion. To put that into some sort of perspective, that's nearly £4.5 million a day and £182,000 every hour of every day. We don't stop for Christmas or bank holidays. So we'd like to think we have a fairly significant spend, and therefore hopefully influence with the spend that we have. It's also a fact that we have 98% of our total spend last year went to companies based in the UK. That's not based on any particular target, strategy or policy that we have. It's just a matter of fact and a reflection of the business that we happened to do last year. So it was just an interesting statistic that we managed to pull out. And so of that 98%, 59.6%, almost 60% of that went to SMEs last year. That was an increase from 55.1% in 2012, but it's probably a reasonable point to highlight that we're not on an ever-increasing target towards 100%, and then we win in terms of our SME target. For us, it's about having a balance in our supply chain, and we have targets of about 50% to make sure we do that. And so 55, 59, 60%, I think we're kind of happy with. Again, we're keen to see the balance. It's not the ever-increasing target towards 100%. So that 60% reflects about £750 million worth of real spends with SMEs, and that spend figure has been externally verified for us by Dun & Bradstreet. We have more than that we think is probably with SMEs, but our level of comfort with the data isn't quite there, and so for the moment we're not counting it. And so the 750 million that we're reporting there is where we have absolute confidence that that company is an SME. And I'll talk a little bit later on about how we do that. One of the other interesting things that we're able to pull out of the spend data for last year in terms of our approach to supply diversity was our spend with women-owned businesses. Last year we spent around 2% with women-owned businesses. That's about £38 million, or at least that's at least 2%. Again, it's a level of data validity that we were happy with, and so at the moment there's probably about another £40 million that we think is probably with women-owned businesses, but it's 2% that we have an absolute level of comfort with. The 2% maybe doesn't necessarily sound like a big figure. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I'm not sure. For us it's just a baseline and a starting point of where we are now. What I do know is that probably in the States, where they've been doing supply diversity for well, maybe slightly differently, but certainly for slightly longer, and the US government, I know, is very focused on all things supply diversity, and they have, I think, over the last couple of years achieved only 5% spend with women-owned businesses. And so for us, I think, to establish that that's what we're doing without really making too much effort, we're pretty comfortable with our baseline, and it gives us somewhere to go. And again, that's against the definition of 51% or more owned by a woman. So that's the end of the data bit for now. I'll tell you a little bit now then about our approach to supply diversity more specifically, and how that fits in more broadly to our approach to sustainability. I suppose with sustainability, our commitment to sustainability is deeply embedded at Balfour Beatty, and it's articulated through a document called our Blueprint for a Sustainable Business. There's 3 focus areas within our Blueprint for a Sustainable Business. They're profitable markets, environmental limits, and healthy communities. And you've probably guessed where supply diversity fits within there. It's profitable markets. Actually, it's all of those. We like to think that supply diversity, and at least our approach to supply diversity, has a bit of a golden thread that runs through everything that we do, and certainly touches on most parts of our operation. But again, I'll touch upon that a little bit later on. This slide also gives you some examples of our successes, our highlights in terms of sustainability over the last year or so. But again, just to give you an idea of our approach to sustainability more broadly. Our commitment to supply diversity doesn't just flow from our approach to sustainability. It's also supported, I suppose, as you would expect, by our approach to equality and diversity. And so our supply diversity strategy is informed by and informs our equality and diversity strategy. And in fact, as you can see from this diagram here, it's actually a core part of that approach. In the bottom left-hand corner, you see cultivating an inclusive supply chain is a key part, a core part of our approach to diversity and inclusion. So yes, so not only does it flow from our approach to equality and diversity, it's supported and embedded and articulated through our Blueprint for a Sustainable Business, and it's also, we have made public commitments in our sustainable procurement policy explicitly around supply diversity. Those commitments are detailed in terms of how we intend to implement those in our sustainable procurement strategy, which helps people internally to understand what they need to do to actually achieve the intended outcomes. We also have, I think as I mentioned earlier on, a 50% target across the business to work with SMEs. That doesn't mean that every project everywhere must achieve 50%, but for the business overall, we look to achieve 50% spend with SMEs. Our approach is also supported by, you may not recognise that gentleman there, he's certainly very familiar to me. He's a chap called Nick Pollard, and he's our group chief, our chief exec for CS UK, and he's an executive sponsor for this agenda, and he certainly is very helpful in making sure that we can get through the things that we need to get through. And I certainly don't think anybody here now underestimates the importance of leadership when implementing a successful supply diversity strategy. I mentioned that diversity is a core part of our sustainable procurement strategy, and I just wanted to give you a quick overview of how that fits in. And we have our sustainable procurement strategy is called our 10-point plan. and it starts with zero harm, i.e. health and safety, as I suppose you would expect for a company like Balfour Beatty, who obviously operates in construction. Next, we've got payment and prompt payment, and again, in terms of sustainability and sustainable supply chains, if we don't pay our suppliers or pay them very quickly, we're not going to be in business, and neither are they for very long. And so prompt payment is something we are certainly committed to, and it's a core part of our approach to sustainable procurement, as is supply chain engagement. And obviously, the closer we can get to our supply chain, it's something like 80% of what we do as a business is actually delivered through our supply chain. And so the closer we can get to our supply chain, the closer we can get them to understanding our values, the better ultimately will be. And next there comes diversity and supply diversity, which again is a core part of our strategy. And we hope that from that diversity, it will deliver us the innovation we're looking for all the other solutions we are, all the other outputs that we're hoping to achieve from our strategy. But when we talk about diversity, just the policy commitments I mentioned earlier on, the three explicit policy commitments that we made in our policy are derive value from a progressive approach to supply chain diversity and inclusion, create supply chain opportunities for local and national suppliers alike, support sustainable communities by ensuring our supply chain invest in local skills and capabilities to leave a lasting legacy from our achievements. They sound pretty lofty and intangible, I appreciate, but it's why we've gone into such detail with our strategy document to actually turn those into some form of practical reality for people to deliver on the ground in terms of supporting our ultimate objective of achieving 50% spend with SMEs. It's probably a reasonable point to explain what we mean by supply diversity at Balfour Beatty, because I seem to have gone on only about SMEs. But when we talk about supply diversity, we mean spend and engagement with SMEs, local and minority-owned suppliers. And actually, just while I'm on this point, we talk about engagement and spend. A lot of activity I hear around supply diversity is more at the engagement end and less on the spend end. And certainly we think that ultimately the true determinant of our success with SME and supply diversity is actually the number of suppliers we successfully engage with and the amount of spend we have with them, not necessarily the amount of meet the bar events we've attended, if that makes any sense. So for us, it's about SMEs, local and minority-owned suppliers. It's not about any one of those, it's about all of those. And partly that's driven by the approach that our clients take, partly it's driven by where we are in terms of best practice. Colin, I know, can probably tell us a little bit more about how some organisations are starting to use SMEs as a proxy for local supply chain and also as a proxy for minority-owned suppliers, with the issue around requiring a local supply chain is potentially anti-competitive in restricting companies from outside a region or outside a country, and so SMEs has become a helpful proxy. And equally, some people are uncomfortable or nervous about using language around minority-owned suppliers, and so again they tend to use SMEs as a proxy. And the belief is that there is an increased proportion of local and minority-owned suppliers within the SME community, and so if you spend with SMEs, as a consequence we spend with local and minority-owned suppliers. And certainly from a monitoring point of view, it's significantly easier to get a handle on our SME supplier base than it is our minority-owned suppliers. Colin, I didn't know whether you wanted to say something at this point about the whole issue of SME as a proxy for minority-owned suppliers.
I would love to, but I think I'm probably on mute at the moment. Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
No, we can all hear.
I'll come back to that point when I speak in a minute, but it's a slight redefinition about how we approach it in the UK. I'll mention that when I come in a minute.
Wonderful. The SMEs, as we understand them in Balfour Beatty, are defined by the EU definition. The reason we take that definition is because it's the one most often used in our contracts. In fact, it's the one only ever used in our contracts, and so it's the definition that we use. The definition you're probably aware of is based around three core criteria. It's around autonomy of ownership, i.e. not owned by a larger entity, number of employees, and turnover. And as I say, we have Dun & Bradstreet who go and audit our supply chain against those three criteria using all kinds of interesting matrices, but that is our definition of an SME. We weren't always in this place, though, and it's not necessarily obvious that a company like Balfour Beatty would do supplier diversity. We recently became Stonewall Diversity Champions, and it's kind of jarred with a lot of people because it's just not what they expected. And I think actually it's part of the difficulty a company like Balfour Beatty has is actually getting across what its values are and the type of company that it is, given the scale and the size of its operation and the difficulty that people have got in actually getting a handle on what we do. But as I said, we haven't always been in this place. But what's driven us here, or partly, is the public policy context in the UK. And there's a number of pieces of legislation and or initiatives that operate around us that encourage, require, / force us to look and take supplier diversity more seriously. And so it's things like the Equalities Act, Localism Act, Public Services Act, and most pressing on my desk at the moment is the Cabinet Office and the government's 25% commitments to spend with SMEs. We're required to report on a quarterly basis into the Cabinet Office what our spend from central government contracts is with SMEs, and so again that's fairly explicit in terms of wanting to know what we're doing and looking for us to increase the proportion of spend that we have. And so our business case, I suppose, is made up of a number of things. It starts by wanting to have access to the best of all available suppliers, and we recognise that the best available suppliers and the best available solutions don't all come from larger organisations. It's also about us wanting to have this balance in our supply chain. As I said, we don't just want to have all our eggs in one basket. Actually, we want lots of baskets and lots of eggs, and so that's what we're trying to do with, I think Alice referenced earlier on about spreading the risk as well. We also anticipate and are already realising increased innovation from working with a more diverse supply chain. SMEs generally seem, in my experience, to be more capable of delivering innovation. I suspect they're no more capable of developing it than larger organisations, but from my perspective, they seem to do a much better job of actually getting it across to us than some of our larger suppliers. And so ultimately they end up in bids, they end up in contracts, and we end up delivering them on the ground. So innovation is a key part of why we want to work with SMEs and minority-owned suppliers. I mentioned before about Cabinet Office and central government reporting and the 25% SME government target. And to be fair, it's about explicit support for work winning. We have lots of questions around SME and supply diversity, and we need to have not only a coherent response but a comprehensive approach that we live and breathe on the ground as well. A new and interesting requirement that's coming out from lots of our clients now is they want attributable indirect spend data. So obviously they know what they've spent with us, but increasingly they want to know what we've done with that money and spent on their behalf. How much did we spend? How much did we spend locally? How much did we spend with SMEs, etc., etc. And I suppose ultimately it's that explicit client requirement. If the warm fuzzy feeling and the fact that it's the right thing to do doesn't motivate you, then the client says so. And so if for no other reason, ultimately we do, and our competitors move because we have to. Our clients say so. I've got a couple of examples, if it's useful, of how that client requirement manifests in our contracts, tenders and bids. And here's one that says, well, you can probably read, but I'll call it out. If you're proposing to subcontract part of this contract, you should provide assurance that you have considered how SMEs can play a part and details of measures you have in place to encourage and enable their participation of subcontractors. I've got a few more examples on the next page, and I suppose the thing I'm trying to illustrate with this is I cannot remember the last time when one of our clients asked us a question around a minority-owned supplier. It is almost always now around SMEs and or local, again, used as a proxy, we think, to achieve the same outcome, which again is why our approach is all-encompassing, and we don't have a separate approach for minority suppliers or SMEs or local. It's all part of the same thing as far as we're concerned. Again, we recognise that working with SMEs, they don't always have the same capabilities or the same level of confidence as some of the larger suppliers, and so there's a role for us to play in supporting SMEs to not only have access to our contracts by removing the barriers or the perceived barriers that there are to engaging with us, but also by supporting them to build capability within their own organisations. One of the ways that we do that is by co-funding something called the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I should have put the web address up here, but it's the supplychainschool.co.uk. And basically it's a pan-construction industry initiative. It's co-funded by lots and lots of our competitors, and essentially we've all got together and said we all have a common problem, we're all facing common issues around sustainability, we all work with variations on the same supply chain, let's get together, give a common message, use a common language to support the supply chain to develop and improve its capability around sustainability, which will improve in turn our ability to support our clients with delivering their own sustainability-related objectives. And so this is one of the practical things that we've done to actually help our suppliers and SME suppliers in particular to improve capability. It's essentially a virtual learning environment. It has a online self-assessment and audit tool, but there's also training materials, e-learning stuff. There's workshops and training events and other activity throughout the year, all to hopefully get people inspired, turned on, and then informed about the issues around sustainability. We've currently got about 850-odd Balfour Beatty suppliers who are registered and making progress with self-assessments with the school at the moment. I think we've got a next event in Sheffield in July and another one in Brighton in September. So please check the website if you get the chance, and we'd love to see you at one of those events. One of the other ways that we support our SMEs, and ultimately this is about economic sustainability. Ultimately, if sustainability is about the social, the economic, and the environmental, this is very much about the economic piece. I think, as I said earlier on, if we don't support our suppliers and we don't pay them on time, they're not going to be there very long. And we recently launched a supply chain finance scheme to help our suppliers get early access to their funds. Our supply chain finance scheme is in contrast to that of some of our competitors who didn't quite get the same sort of publicity for their schemes, partly because their schemes were mandatory, partly because the schemes involve a charge, and that wasn't really the approach that we've taken. Our scheme is voluntary, it's open to suppliers who feel it will benefit them, and it operates on a not-for-profit basis, and so it's not something we're doing to generate income, it's something genuinely to support suppliers to get early access to their funds. The other thing in terms of supporting and working with our supply chain, I suppose, is around collaboration to create sustainable innovation, and this is again around the whole supply chain engagement piece. And I won't labour on this, but really just to give you an idea that we work closely with our supply chain, and in particular with our SMEs, to identify appropriate innovations that we can share on our projects, and we have a process for making that happen now. It was described to me as a innovation gateway and all kinds of other things, and somebody recently said, yes, it's a suggestion box, and essentially that's what it is. It's a posh suggestion box that's got bells and whistles online, but essentially what it means is we have an active process for engaging and collaborating and sucking the ideas up from the ground of projects and from our supply chain. A couple of quick case studies for you before I finish off then, and this one is around, I suppose really just around social footprinting, and it's really just to tell you that increasingly our approach to supply diversity is informing our approach to social footprinting. Clients are very keen now to know the impacts of our operations on local communities, and so we are developing an approach, and we've got a pilot happening at the moment on a project in Scotland, and we're working with an organisation called New Economics Foundation to be able to publish a 2013 social footprint for Balfour Beatty, which hopefully you'll hear more about in the future. In terms of our spend figures, then I said we're about 59%, 60% SME spend, and we compare well to our competitors. There's a couple of them detailed there who share their information with the Cabinet Office, and we're probably there or thereabouts in terms of the top tiers of suppliers in terms of the percentage of spend and the proportion of spend that we have. But actually when you break that down into pounds, shilling and pence and the sheer scale of the operations in Balfour Beatty, there's actually nobody who spends as much as Balfour Beatty with SMEs in the UK. And we recently evidenced that and were recognised by David Cameron, who came down last week in actual fact, to announce our commitment to spend £1 billion with SMEs this year. And so that's a 33% increase from the £750 million we were able to verify last year, and it's by far and away outstrips any of our competitors in terms of spend with SMEs and spend with UK-based SMEs as well. And so we were delighted to have David Cameron join us, and you can see me there in the background somewhere, but I won't labour on that either. Just a quick word about Supplier Diversity Europe before I hand over to Colin. And really to say that we are one of those organisations who have done worked through their accreditation, and we use it as a framework for informing our approach and our strategy. And really before we engaged with Colin, we as an organisation recognised that we needed to do something about the issue, but really didn't know what to do. We had lots of pockets of good practice all over the place, but not really a coherent strategy. And so what the Supplier Diversity Accreditation really helped us with was giving us that framework for implementation, that roadmap for what to do. And our action plans are based around their framework to this day, and we're currently working towards level 4 of that accreditation, which Colin will tell you about a little bit later on. But certainly I just want to give a quick tip of the hat to the Supplier Diversity Accreditation. My final point is just about data and the value of good data. I can't express. I was at an SME event in London yesterday, and Francis Maud was there talking about the issues that they have with data, and they had to phone up suppliers to find. It was reassuring to know that it's not just us, but our biggest challenge has been getting to grips with what we spend, where we spend it, and who we spend it with. Balfour Beatty Construction Services recently merged from 9 separate businesses into one business, and as a consequence we've got lots of different systems, and we didn't really have a handle on where we were. And so finally, to get an understanding of where we are in our baseline was really central to informing what we did next with our strategy. And I suppose that, again, the value of good data is about having the ability to make evidence-based decision-making as opposed to that gut feeling. Gut feeling is often good and it's based on passion, but actually nothing beats a bit of evidence-based decision-making. And certainly from our client's point of view, it's been absolutely central in giving them confidence of our previous performance, but also in providing them with data throughout the life of our contracts as well. And potentially the data that evidences our performance around supplier diversity is the thing that's starting to differentiate us from some of our competitors, because maybe we can all build a building, but actually what we can do is also provide them with the evidence that they can satisfy their sustainability objectives as well. And so my final point I'll leave you on is just the value of good data, and don't underestimate the value of that. I'll hand you over to Colin. I look forward to speaking to some of you in the question and answers, and I hope that's been useful in some way.
Hi, thank you, Aaron and Alice. Balfour, I'm Colin Hand. I'm going to go through a few points here. I have to say that Balfour Beatty has made some big and really creative strides in this area, and what's really interesting, although there's a lot in place, they've done an awful lot in a short time, which is, I think, a lesson for all of us as well. I'm just going to do some quick recap points and just look briefly at the accreditation, SD accreditation that Aaron just mentioned. I quite like the expression supplier diversity of coming of age in the UK, which I think it really is. At a recent procurement conference that I attended, it was seen generally to be the happening thing, whatever that means. And part of the reason is that supplier diversity, as part of the sustainability agenda and many other things, has now developed its own UK and European identity. So although the US is very important, it's no longer seen just as a US initiative. And obviously there it's legally driven. In Europe it's not, although there's some legal areas around the edges. And also the business benefits are being seen an awful lot more. And also there is a change to an approach. And Erin touched on this. Very much the starting point is work with SMEs and smaller businesses at that. And then and in a sense, this makes much more sense to people because they can understand that about small businesses. And then within that, there are obviously the local programs. And as part of that equation also is working with minority-owned businesses. And primarily, as Alice said at the beginning, that covers a range of areas. But but in practice, it's still mostly women and ethnic minority-owned businesses. And one of the points we make is, it's right to start with SMEs, but don't forget that underrepresented business, minority-owned businesses is part of the equation, which links immediately in to the local emphasis as well. And of course, business benefits, which both Alice and Aaron have mentioned, are, crucial in terms of selling, adding value, people understanding what it is. And from our experience, it's really important you define your own. There's no textbook to say these are the business benefits of supplier diversity or sustainability. You have to make sense in your own way, although you can obviously take guidance and case studies from others. And in the UK, they're much clearer than they used to be. I mean, there's now a growing awareness and some facts and figures to show, with tangible evidence to show that small businesses really can be more flexible, they can be more innovative, they can be more creative, they think outside the box often, they have imagination with customers. I'm not saying it's all perfect and big companies don't do that, but there's a place for SMEs and some added value as well. So, for example, Fujitsu, we've done some work with, which is a large global company with a supplier diversity program they're working on, have found innovation, particularly in their sector, which is around IT and related sectors. Just picking up very quickly, touched on by Aaron and Alice, is that government sees the SMEs as crucial to economic recovery and much more optimistically growth. And there's 25 spend in the SME market. And as Aaron mentioned, David Cameron was there last week with Balfour Beatty, recognise a potential billion spend. And as important in a business way, companies really are being increasingly asked about their approach to SMEs, small SMEs, and how they positively engage with SME as part of a bidding process. And this is really quite a big issue with lots of the companies we're working with. And finally, just as on some recap points, let's not be cynical here, but let's face it, work around sustainability, environment, CSR, and supplier diversity is an integral part of that is good for the image and the brand and reputation of companies, but really important is they are seen and they can show that actually it's not just talk, it's actually some really positive impacts. And supplier diversity is actually quite a good way of really measuring that and showing it as well. Just something about the SDE accreditation, which is Supplier Diversity Europe, and it's part of what I do. As a backdrop, it is worth saying that increasing number of companies are doing work around supplier diversity. They're in different places, and it is something that's been around for a while, but it is something that there is definitely a sort of change that's happening where companies are grabbing hold of it as part of the sustainability CSR procurement programs and really making it work rather than talking about it. So you've seen what Balfour Beatty are doing. There's another construction company, Skanska. There's Bristol Myers Squibb in the pharmaceutical industry. There's Fujitsu I've mentioned. There's EDF, Goldman Sachs. There's a lot of companies at this, and at SDE, Supplier Diversity Europe, we've been at this thing called Supplier Diversity for a while, and we're pleased to see at long last there's real progress being made in the UK. And a lot of our early work, 7, 8, 9 years ago, was primarily with US corporate companies developing programs in the UK. And I think we learnt through that, and with them, that it needs to be something that makes sense to the UK or individual European companies and across Europe as well. So there's a UK Eurocentric approach, which is one I think sort of supplier diversity is beginning to make sense to lots of companies. So the accreditation, funny word accreditation, but that's what it is, came out of all this work, and it really was us wanting to move things ahead in a systematic way. So the aim is to through the accreditation, and I think that Aaron touched on this, it does provide a focus and structure to the development of a supplier diversity program. It's not to say you might not be working with many other organisations in doing it. And so it's not so much a mishmash of ideas, but there's some clarity to it in a process. And it does include the provision of some advice and support, as well as then the assessment and verification and eventually the accreditation. And companies, our experience of working with companies to date, we piloted it and now we're working it, is it does really move them on in a fast and proactive way as well. And just that final point there is the sort of key areas we look at is leadership and management, and leadership is really, really important because if you don't have the leadership behind it, not an awful lot happens. And then working through buyers and internal stakeholders, existing and potential suppliers and external stakeholders, all part of the mix as well. Just to pick up some of the things we've learned, it forms part of the accreditation, but it's just some issues, and it comes out of what both Erin and Alice have said as well. All that sounds self-evident. Agreeing a broad strategy and approach with an identified lead sounds self-evident, but it's absolutely essential. We found that over the years, too many companies have lacked focus and clarity in what they were doing. They do lots of bits and pieces that sound good and look good, but all a little bit confused. So actually developing a clear strategy and who is doing what with responsibility, doesn't necessarily have to be one lead, it could be several, but very clear what it is. And also this must relate to the benefits that it's bringing to the business, because it needs to be sold internally and externally. And of course, yes, you do need clear objectives with an action plan, and the companies that do best on that have that in a fairly definite way. Another really important point is build from experience, because often you're doing many of the things already in place. So, for example, Erin just mentioned that I think 2% of his businesses are women-owned businesses, but that's something they've found out. Often you'll be doing spends with SMEs, so you'll be building on something but doing it with some clarity as well. So review where you are. And it does, I think it's really important, it does help you sell it internally if some of the things you're doing already and you're just refocusing it and clarifying it as well. And crucial, obviously, is to get close to working with SMEs and minority ethnic-owned businesses, as well as local businesses, developing an engagement program. And a lot of you will be doing work around that, but I think Erin mentioned, so it's quite important. You can spend a lot of time doing that. It's very, very important, but also think about your spend as well. It's not just about engaging, it's actually about what it actually means in practice as well. We're nearly at the end in terms of general tips. As we said, working locally and developing programs locally with a positive impact is a core part of the supplier diversity area. That includes not just local businesses, it also includes within that minority and underrepresented businesses as well. And what is really important to that is to look at developing programs and measuring and assessing outcomes as well. Balfour Beatty started doing that, and some of the companies we're working with can show some real differences as well. Arranging meeting the buyers events, many of you will be doing these, but maybe you're slightly refocusing it in the concept of supplier diversity is important as well. Fujitsu at the moment are running lots of these programs. Within that, yes, diverse businesses is part of the equation, and here our experience is test this out in geographical areas with particular areas to make sure it's working, and Johnson & Johnson have done some good work on this in West London. And in terms of what you're looking at, do review your procurement processes, and look to see if there's any unnecessary barriers along the way. And this might include just unnecessary red tape, over complex bidding systems, along with things like making you've got quick and fair payment terms as well. And finally, just on that slide is, yes, working with your first and second tier suppliers. I mean, they might well be working more with SMEs and underrepresented businesses than anyone else. So developing a relationship with them, letting them know what you're doing, involving them in it as well. And EDF, for example, have recently run a series of meetings across the country where they meet their suppliers to talk about their programs. Finally, we'll ignore the first one because I've already spoken about it. Data, 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 more of it, please. Really important, and supplier diversity programs can concentrate your mind in looking at your spends, where it is, what it's on, and looking at SMEs within that. Communication is as sacred as developing your strategy because you are selling this concept and you need to sell it to sometimes colleagues and staff who are a little bit not entirely sure why it's happening or not. So you need clarity about the program. You need to set your business benefits and promote it, of course, internally, externally, and also developing marketing plans about it. And finally, yes, it is part of your sustainability and CSR programs, and that's a good way to position supplier diversity. It links also to your diversity programs and ethical programs as well. It is part of building your external profile and build that through supplier diversity and related work with your stakeholders, but also with media and government, and why not get some strong positive coverage about what you're doing. And here, success, positive stories and case studies are really important. We work so often with companies that are not highlighting some of the brilliant work they're doing because they don't recognize that it is. So look at what you're doing, and there's nothing wrong. It's not being cheap. It's actually, why not tell the stories of some of the creative work that you're doing? And with that, I'm going to hand back to Alice.
I think we'll use the last 8 minutes here for questions. And the first question is for you, Aaron. It's around your management team, and there's a question of how your management team has actually backed up this supply diversity initiative. Could you elaborate on a little bit more about that?
How the what, sorry?
How your management team has helped you in this process, your senior management team. I mean, the question was, what was the appetite like within Balfour Beatty from senior management?
Initially, it was, kind of 5-6 years ago, it's lots of blank faces, and I'm sure this is something to do with somebody else, but increasingly, for lots of different reasons, they've all, one by one, come to the table. I think for some of the reasons we went through in terms of the business case, ultimately the client said so. And so there's not really any argument in terms of we need a response to this. And so for that we get we've had senior management support. I think what's happened more recently, where we've had kind of passive support previously kind of to get on with it, really now I think senior management and the board of Balfour Beatty truly understand the real benefits to Balfour Beatty because we're realising them, and also how it links in with all our other agendas and how it supports clients to deliver their own. And so actually that senior management have been absolutely central to us getting this in. But key to convincing them was I think partly a negotiated piece around us understanding what are their existing priorities and finding a way that our agenda was going to support them in delivering what they were trying to do. And so, they might have got it generally, they might be happy for us to do it, but actually to get the strategic fit, it was important for us to find how supply diversity supported them in achieving what they were already trying to achieve. And there was a bit of jiggery-pokery and fluff and fiddle in doing that, but one way or the other, we managed to get them all to see that actually this wasn't just good for us and good for the business, it was actually directly going to be good for them. So that's kind of how we did it.
Colin, there's somebody asking here, why do we need a more Eurocentric approach? Why doesn't the US approach not work in Europe? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the US approach does have some things that work in Europe, but of course in the US it's completely legally driven. It's a completely different world than we have in the UK or Europe for that matter. There's a requirement that organisations do something around supplier diversity. So the starting point is very different as well. And I think the other thing is, it's quite important that that individual companies within the UK and across Europe, it makes sense to them. If you're working in the procurement department and you're being asked to do things that don't make a lot of business sense to you, they don't relate to what you're doing. So it is about basically, I mean, it's very obvious really, you customize what you're doing to something that makes sense in your own business. So, and obviously, not to say that US companies don't do fantastic stuff, but I think increasingly they are saying they can't just repeat what works, say, in New York or San Francisco or Phoenix City. It doesn't necessarily work in London or Paris. So it's about asking and demanding that there's a program around supplier diversity, but making sure it's something that's relevant to the individual country in Europe.
Yeah. I also totally agree. I mean, it has to make sense to the business and especially also to procurement departments. Otherwise, it will never get embedded.
Well, never happen. Yeah,
it will never happen, yeah. Which is also one of the next questions they're asking. How do you ensure that junior management gets involved with SMEs and gets education within supply diversity? Got any examples there?
You're asking me, Colin? Yeah.
Yeah, or any one of you.
Yeah. I'll kick off there. You're talking about junior managers or senior managers, but it is whoever it is, what level, it is part of a program of work that's happening around sustainability and CSR and supplier diversity as well, and developing a program and how you deliver it. And I have to say, a lot of the companies we work with, do work very hard to develop links with SMEs in various ways, and some of them within that, some minority-owned businesses as well. And I mentioned Meet the Buyer events, which is something that happens quite a lot. The other thing is there's organisations like Business in the Community that help sort of arrange some of those things. And very, very separate to all this is there are some specialist agencies like MSSDC, the National Minority Supplier Development Programme. There's WE Connect. They are obviously quite specialist, but they also develop work and programs as well. I don't know if, Aaron, you've got anything to add to that?
Yeah, only around, from our point of view, I suppose with kind of junior managers, we really don't talk about supply diversity. We talk about the individual actions, and so we don't talk about the theory or the subject. That's kind of for us academics and practitioners. What we talk about is SME spend, we talk about local spend, and so I suppose that's kind of how we, and I suppose we talk about the Meet the Buyer events, and we talk about the individual practical things that we do, the local supply chain engagement, and all those types of things, as opposed to actually, so we just kind of move around any politics we might be associated to the subject of supply diversity and just get on with talking about the practical things that we need to do. And partly we've got around that by putting it in process. And so we've just embedded supply diversity in the process. And so we have management processes and gateways that people have to go through to achieve particular things. And part of that is about embedding the decision making. So for example, we have local procurement plans on all of our projects. So each of our projects and each of our QSs and the procurement teams have to consider which of these contracts or which of the packages which we have available to let could be either suitable now or made suitable for SMEs. They have to actively consider that, tick a box, and write a justification if for whatever reason they're not able to make a contract suitable for SMEs. And so for us, partly it's just about putting it into process. So we don't debate it, it's just embedded in the process, and then we manage the process and people's part in that. So that's kind of how we do it.
Excellent. I think time is up now, and 3 or 4 of the questions that have been asked are now answered. And I think we'll hand back the key to Stephen. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Great. Thank you, Alice. And thank you, Aaron and Colin, also for your presentations and for getting through so many questions. And also for everyone who joined us for the webinar. I'd just like to remind everyone that a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform. And as soon as that goes live, I'll send out a link to those in an email to everybody. And also, we had lots of questions come in, so we'll try and post some of those into a forum discussion and try and get some more discussion and answers around those. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you found today interesting and useful, and you'll be able to join us for more webinars in the coming months. So thank you.